Well, good evening. So it's a great delight to be here at the Royal Institution. This, as you know, is one of the first spaces in Britain, in the world, where science was debated. But actually, from the off, this was a space where politics, arts, and philosophy were brought to bear upon the public. And so we are in a noble tradition. We've started a little late, as Robert said, so we will be finishing also a few minutes late. So those of you who have restaurant reservations, you may need to cool your heels, but I promise we'll be done by 22:09. The motion that we'll be debating this evening is that the benefit system perpetuates misery. And I'm going to give you a few statistics. Now, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I've actually lectured here on neuroscience, and I'm much more nervous talking about politics and benefits than I am talking about neuroscience. But let me give you some facts. And those of you in the back there, if I've got it wrong, don't hiss until it's your turn to speak. But it's since 1942 that the benefit system was instituted on the recommendations of William Beveridge. And it's not clear that it's worked out exactly as he proposed. We hear a lot of outcry about long-term dependency, and we have to ask, is the system doing the job it was designed to do? Or actually, is it entrenching the very problems that it was designed to solve? We spend a huge amount of money on the benefits. Benefits and tax credits for 2015-16 will be £217 billion. And of that, 2.4 billion will be on unemployment benefits, 11.7 billion on child benefit, 26 billion on housing benefit, and 29 billion on child and working tax credits. So is it the case that the benefit system is something that we need to radically rethink and overhaul? Or is it just an easy scapegoat for governments seeking to make politically difficult spending cuts while ignoring greater social issues? These are the debates matters that we'll be addressing. And you only have to think of the Chancellor's reversal on his massive proposed cuts to disability benefits and Ian Duncan Smith's subsequent resignation as the Work and Pensions Minister to get a sense of how explosive these issues are. Our first speaker for the motion is a columnist for The Spectator, where he coined the phrase virtue signalling and was a leader writer on the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. He is the author of The Welfare State We're In, and most recently, The Welfare of Nations. Please welcome James Bartholomew.
I'll sit here. I'll stand here, actually. The first time I came to this is an extraordinary auditorium, and the first time I came to it, there was a debate between the most bizarre combination of people. There was Nigel Farage on one side and Giscard d'Estaing on the other. But whatever they argued at the time, I'm afraid what we're arguing, Adam and I, is probably more controversial than whatever they were arguing. And because of that, I have to sort of set out a couple of things straight away. One is that I accept that the intentions of the people who created and voted for the benefit system were good and philanthropic, and their intentions were good. But this is not a debate about intentions, it is a debate about outcomes. Secondly, I also accept that many people have been helped by benefits, and that countless people have been helped who are in difficult circumstances. So that is accepted too. And you may wonder, well, am I arguing? And what I'm arguing is that the system has become dysfunctional, and a system that was working pretty well in the 1950s has become extremely dysfunctional and resulted in millions of people suffering literally misery. Before I start on the substantive argument, though, I want a little bit of history. Actually, benefits didn't start in 1942. In fact, benefits go back as long as human history, including government benefits. So it goes back to Roman times. There was the corn dole, and if you go to Rome in the Forum, there you can still see Trajan's market where which were administered the corn dole, and it became excessively expensive and subject to abuse, which may sound familiar. More recently, there is in Britain, very recently, there was the friendly societies in the late 19th century. The overwhelming majority of British working men were members of friendly societies, and there were also mutual societies and trade unions, all of which provided benefits to their members, such as unemployment benefit, disability benefit, payments to spouses if the husband died early. And so there was a great panoply of benefit systems that existed, including the government. And Also, there was a family and charity, and there's a great wealth and diversity of sources of welfare. And this is just a brief taster. If you want to, I can recommend a book about it, actually. It's called The Welfare State We're In. So, so that's the bit of history, but we're arguing now onto the misery. Now, there are several routes through which the welfare state or benefit system has created misery. Probably the most important of them is unemployment. Now, I did a little study for that book of the value of unemployment benefit in relation to wages. And I found, to my surprise, that the level of unemployment benefit after the war was lower than it had been in 1938, actually lower. And that runs in accord with the fact that unemployment remained very low after the war, and indeed remained low for 19 years of low unemployment. Towards the end of that period, governments began to increase the unemployment benefit. In fact, there was a 50% increase in relation to wages in the period up to 65. And it went way beyond the level that had existed in 1938. Accordingly, the level of unemployment rose. It rose to a new post-war record of 4%. After 1967, the level of 2% has never been seen again. We've never got back to that. But having made that mistake, they then increased benefits even further to a peak in 1974. And then there was a new peak in 2 years later, because you expect a lag in these things, 2 years later, a new peak of unemployment. It reached 6%, 3 times what it had been for 19 years in the post-war years. So are these, I would argue that they increased unemployment, obviously, that the benefits were badly increased by stupid people who didn't understand what Beveridge was trying to do. And does that cause misery? Yes, it does. The number of ways of measuring this, but the Eurobarometer survey done by the European Union measures how happy people are or sad. And they find what is correlated with different circumstances. They found overwhelmingly the most important cause of unhappiness is unemployment. More important than being relatively poor. It's that. And another statistic is the people who are unemployed are 10 times more likely to attempt suicide. Really, misery is not an understatement of what these people are going through. And the unemployment figures, bad as they are not the full story, because there's a lot of unemployment hidden in incapacity benefit. Incapacity benefit was made higher than unemployment benefit by Heath in the early 70s, and then increased again and again, and the conditions were very easy, and so the numbers tripled, more than tripled. So people weren't any iller, but the numbers on it tripled. And a Labour administration, the Blair-Brown administration, estimated that there were 1 million people who are on that benefit who were capable of work. So to the 1.7 million unemployed, we need to add a substantial number of people on invalidity benefit, making over about 2.5 million people who are unemployed, working age, who could and should be working and are made miserable because they're not working. There's another route which takes place, and that is lone parenting. Again, in the 60s and 70s, it got to the position where if you became a lone parent, you would get a council flat. You went to the top of the queue. Meanwhile, you were not expected to seek work, not even to seek work, until your youngest child reached the age of 16. This resulted in an extraordinary boom in lone parenting in this country. We are now the European country with the second highest rate of lone parenting, vastly higher than some other countries in Europe and indeed the world. The other country is Ireland, incidentally. And does this cause misery? Yes, I believe it does. It causes misery for the children and doesn't make either of the parents happy either. But the worst thing is for the children. Again, there was a study done of trying to work out, did being poor make children unhappy? And done by a proper academic who looked at all the variables that could be there, called Gunda Nice, and she expected and wanted to find that it was being poor that made children unhappy. she found there was practically no correlation at all. What made children unhappy was lone parenting and broken parenting. That's what makes children unhappy. They also, of course, as many of you will know, children, many do very well, but there's a greater likelihood among children of lone parents that they will do badly at school, that they will become delinquent, and ultimately, I'm afraid, more of them are likely to end up in prison, the ultimate of misery. So there are other routes to misery through our benefit system, but those are two I would start off with, and I do believe that the benefit system creates and then perpetuates misery. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Our first speaker against the motion, and do feel free to use the lectern should you choose, is the Labour MP for Birmingham Yardley. She's known for being one of the most outspoken members of the House of Commons, not least this evening. I don't know if you spoke, but you certainly voted. Before entering politics, she was a business and development manager at domestic violence charity Women's Aid. Please welcome Jess Phillips.
Thank you very much, and sorry that I held everybody up. It is popular today to think that the welfare state has failed. The dreamers of the 1940s created some things that were built to last in our hearts. The NHS is the best example of this, of an institution that we would all roll up our sleeves to protect. Until they threatened to take the recipes off the BBC online content, there were few things that stirred the hearts of British people as our NHS does. Welfare payments, benefits, have fared much less well. And even with the Labour Party, the party I'm from, rolling up their sleeves to get tough on benefits. The rhetoric that our system has failed and the arguments today that benefits cause misery are our common view, and I'm just not sure why, because it is simply not my experience. My name is Jess, and I lived on benefits. I'm not work shy. It's only Tuesday, and I'm now entering the 25th hour of my work week. It will be 90 by the end of the week. I've claimed and lost a number of different benefits in my life, and this is not virtue signalling, nor am I going to bleed your hearts with my ragged life. I am not special. I was not living in misery, and I will wager that every single person in this room at some point or another received a cash handout from the taxpayer. Everyone in this room who was born or resided in the UK as a child is old enough to have received child benefit, or family allowance as we used to call it. You don't look particularly miserable to me. I don't. And I bet you all enjoyed that maybe your mum and dad might be able to buy you an extra pair of shoes every 6 months or so. I was 22 when I had my first son, and fresh out of university, I was working in a pub in the evenings and a secretary in the day. The first benefit I ever claimed was state maternity fund. It is a fund available to women who are not at work in their qualifying days before they fall pregnant, so their employer has no obligation to pay them any maternity pay. I didn't intend to have a baby at 22, so I was not a yummy mummy who had planned out her career and worked at the best day to fall pregnant. I was a young woman who had previously been told that I could never have children, so I thought I should go for it. I didn't think, I'll be in the money. I mean, I had a £10 10-ounce baby. You'd have to pay me £1 million to do that again. Seriously. I thought that I had a chance to live a life that so many others take for granted. My boyfriend at the time, now my husband, I'm not one of those feckless lone mothers, he was on a low wage. We didn't have an extravagant life, but the maternity fund meant we could afford to eat. We had a £30 a week budget for our food and ate chickpea curry every night. Not a sign of misery, but it is a bit boring. While I was on maternity leave, I had 3 volunteer jobs caring for elderly people, newly settled refugees, and young offenders. It was this experience, not my degree, that got me my first proper job, working at a charity for people with HIV. I could never have had that job without my volunteer experience, and I could never have my volunteer experience without my maternity fund benefit. I then moved on to claim a mixture of working tax and child tax credits that paid for 60% of my childcare. Without that money, I would never have been able to afford to go back to work. By the time my second son was born, my elder son was 3, he had his free nursery place from a Labour government, and I had moved my way up the career ladder to no longer need any benefits. So the idea that this has caused me misery is an absolutely ridiculous one without any founding. For me and my mum friends at the time, the benefits system was the hand up, not the hand out. It was a hand up out of misery and onto opportunity. Part of the idea that benefits cause misery is the easy categorisation of us and them. We rarely see ourselves in the same category as the people on Birmingham's very own Benefit Street. We wouldn't swap places with them, but most benefit claimants look just like me. They look just like you, just like your mums and dads. They look like the teaching assistants at your kids' school and look like the people who serve you tea in the cafe. Maybe I'm a glass half full kind of girl, but I'm not seeing misery as far as the eye can see. So yes, maybe there is a debate about some of the effects of long-term worklessness has on people, but this out-of-hand idea that the benefit that causes the work, it's the benefit that causes the misery, not the worklessness, simply doesn't stack up. We have to accept that it is not the cash in their pockets that causes misery. It is that these people, many of whom have been workless through a changing face of industry and the supply of jobs in this country, or perhaps the choices that they make about taking time off to raise their children, they are seen as a different breed, a lesser species in the food chain. The very idea that we would debate the idea that welfare benefits perpetuate misery shows the attitude that we have towards these people. Perhaps it is our attitude that needs to change. Anyone who thinks a young woman just like me had babies to get more money or a council flat does not understand young women, what drives them, what motivates them, what gives them worth. In a debate on the cessation of tax credits in the House of Commons, I listened to Tory after Tory stand up and say that the women who work for them in their businesses didn't want pay rises because it would take them over the threshold, the income bracket, for receiving their tax credits. My natural instinct was to shout out, it's employers like you miser, who don't pay a proper living wage, that means that the taxpayer has to subsidise you, but God forbid I be anti-business. Member after member dared to tell me that tax credits stifled ambition, caused misery, while myself and my colleague Angela Rayner sat opposite them, both having lived on tax credits and been bloody well ambitious enough to get the same lofty jobs as these unworldly fools. I'll wager that each and every one of them was given some handout by their families but professed to be completely self-made. It's what my nan used to call the idle rich. I'd suggest we made a Benefit Street-style programme about it, but I fear that Made in Chelsea has beat me to it. Don't get me wrong, I know that there are some people who are swinging the lead, claiming while working or happy to live on benefits, but these people are, in my experience, the minority. While others here might have fancy data lining people up with numbers, I'd wager that no one else on the panel has a caseload of 5,000 people coming to them every year. I see the realities, not the figures. I know the figures very often don't tell the real facts. I have seen how benefits do the exact opposite of causing misery. I have seen them mean actual freedom. Before I was elected to Parliament, I worked for Women's Aid. Benefits are a way out for abused women. Housing benefit for women in refuge literally means freedom from misery. I'll tell you what misery looks like, not some survey that says people who are workless are a bit more sad. I've seen misery, real abject misery. Akila was a woman who lived in refuge. She came to us after she was found by a passerby on the side of the road in the Black Country. She was pregnant and had drunk bleach to kill herself. She spent her first few months of her pregnancy tied underneath a table and been fed scraps thrown at her. She had been taught to eat again, and when she arrived, her misery had meant that she was almost completely dead behind the eyes. Akila was not one woman. I've met thousands like her. Each and every one was given housing benefit in order to live in a refuge from their misery. I've seen women who squirreled away a bit of money that they had from their child benefit, saved it up so that them and their children could escape. Hope was what state benefits gave these women. You might think that these women are the exception, but if we want to throw around data, 1 in 3 women will suffer domestic abuse in their lives. These are big numbers. I've also seen how taking a family's benefits away doesn't make it easier to work. In fact, it makes it harder. Here is an example of a family of 5 in my constituency who were made unable to work by the removal of their benefits. They came to my surgery after all of their benefits had been removed by an inflexible system. They had to declare themselves homeless and ended up in a grotty bed and breakfast 10 miles away from their home, all sleeping in one room. The father now had to drive his family all the way across the city to take his 2 children to different schools twice a day, meaning that he was no longer able to make his job as a caretaker at a local school. He lost his job. This is one of the number of cases I have seen where a reduction or a complete 1 minute, okay. Where a complete cessation of a family's benefits have made it impossible for people to work because nicely located, convenient jobs don't just spring up miraculously because the state gets tough. Taking away a disabled person's benefits doesn't suddenly make loads of employees seek out autistic employees or make newly accessible workplaces exist in businesses with accessible public transport. What is the alternative? I want to see a society where everyone can work, but I also want to be a size 10. We all get that something needs to be done to stop worklessness, but as soon as we start making changes to welfare, we have to make exceptions. The disabled are deserving. Women in refuge, they're deserving. The parents who could never afford to work without benefits because of childcare, they want to work, so they're deserving. Pensioners, they worked all their lives. Let's whack them in the deserving column. Kids who don't have a nice, cushy family home that when they come of age, kids in the care system, for example, they're deserving. Pretty soon, there are more people in column A than column B, and we say, it's going to cost too much money to do anything about this. All the people in column A are people receiving benefits and are not being caused misery. The people in column B are the minority. I'm telling you now that taking away the benefits as a standalone policy is a standalone policy that has no understanding of people's lives. It creates the kind of misery I hope that nobody here will ever have to suffer. That is why I urge you all to vote against the motion.
Thank you, Jess, and apologies for having to ding you at the end there. Our second speaker for the motion is a lecturer in the neurobiology of personality at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience at my own institution, King's College London, but no bias there, and is the author of The Welfare Trait, How State Benefits Affect Personality. Please welcome Adam Perkins.
As anyone who's had the misfortune to wade through my CV will know, it's got more holes than the borders of the EU. I've got a very patchy work record. In the 10 years between the end of my bachelor's degree and the start of my PhD, I was in and out of a range of low-paid jobs, and in between I claimed unemployment benefits. I therefore suspect I'm more interested than most academics in helping to ensure that the welfare state is there to look after future generations like it was there to look after me. But there is a dark side to our benefit system that means it's perpetuating, not alleviating misery. And if we're pro-benefits, we should care about this, I think. Today's benefit system is the product of centuries of development, as James's book shows, a high point of which was William Beveridge's 1942 report entitled Social Insurance and Allied Services. It's a good read, actually. This report set out a blueprint for the modern welfare state, but what many people don't realize is that Beveridge's vision was a tightrope act in which he sought to provide an income for the unemployed, but without eroding work motivation. We can get a sense of this from a passage on page 58 in which he advocated workfare. I quote, "Men and women who've been unemployed for a certain period should be required as a condition of continued benefit to attend a work or training center, such attendance being designed both as a means of preventing habituation to idleness and as a means of improving capacity for earning." And the notion that the welfare state affects work motivation is not just pub talk. It can be tested scientifically. So today I'm going to summarize some data that suggests we have fallen off Beveridge's tightrope and that the benefit system now perpetuates misery. Moreover, it doesn't just do this in the short term by eroding the work motivation of adults, but it also entrenches misery in the long term by sowing the seeds of worklessness in future generations. Beveridge was aware of this latter problem, as shown by this additional quote from page 58. "For young persons who have not yet the habit of continuous work, the period should be shorter. For boys and girls, there should ideally be no unconditional benefit at all. Their enforced abstention from work should be made an occasion of further training." The failure of successive governments to heed Beveridge's warning about the dangers of unconditional benefit is illustrated by the results of recent studies by Dr. Andrew Dunn, senior lecturer in the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Lincoln, who is right there. For example, in a 2013 study, Dr. Dunn interviewed 40 welfare-to-work industry employees and found not only that between a quarter and a half of the claimants encountered by these workers over a 6-month period did not want employment, but also that these attitudes had become ingrained across multiple generations in the form of a dependency culture. Dr. Dunn followed up this finding with a 2014 study which compared the responses of employed and unemployed individuals in the UK to the statement, having almost any job is better than being unemployed. The study utilized 2 waves each of the British cohort study and the National Child Development Study, which is 10,868 participants in total. This revealed that the percentage of unemployed respondents disagreeing or strongly disagreeing with that statement was more than twice as high as the percentage for employed respondents. Moreover, the size of the effect was large. Approximately 50% of the unemployed respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement, in contrast to 20% of the employed respondents. Finally, Dr. Dunn showed that when other variables were controlled for, unemployed people were still significantly more likely than employed people to prefer unemployment. So here we have empirical support for Beveridge's concern that unconditional benefits would encourage habituation to idleness. But it gets worse because research also shows the benefit system is incentivizing extra births in disadvantaged households. This is a problem because dysfunctional, employment-resistant personality characteristics approximating to relatively low scores on conscientiousness and agreeableness are overrepresented amongst welfare claimants. To give some perspective, across the whole of society on average, about 1% of the population meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. Amongst welfare claimants, it's 7%. For milder but still troublesome issues with behaving conscientiously and agreeably, the general prevalence is approximately 10%. Amongst welfare claimants, it's approximately 60%. So we can see that a child born to a welfare claimant is 6 times more likely than average to have a parent who is relatively unconscientious and disagreeable. And this discovery is important because personality generalizes across situations. So if an individual is not sufficiently conscientious and agreeable to work for a living, then they're also unlikely to give their children the care and attention they need. A benefit system which incentivizes extra births in disadvantaged households will therefore increase the number of children who are exposed to negligent parenting. This is a problem because studies show that parental neglect promotes the development of aggressive, antisocial, and rule-breaking personality characteristics that harm life chances in adulthood. So here we have a situation in which the benefit system is incentivizing the least capable parents on average to have extra children, those extra children who will consequently have a higher than average risk of being neglected and thus suffering personality damage. And then the story repeats itself. And that's a central claim of my book, The Welfare Trait, which brought me here, which is available in all good bookstores, which I hesitated to publish for 2 years because I knew it would be vilified by opponents of welfare reform. But I finally plucked up the courage to publish thanks to a friend who became angry when I explained these data to him. And he wasn't angry at the data, he was angry at my cowardice. Because in his view, as an academic employed by the taxpayer, I had a duty to inform the public that their revenues from taxes were being used to fund what he labeled as state-sponsored brain damage, his words. So this is the tragedy of the modern benefit system. It's lost its bearings to such an extent that Beveridge's carefully balanced, conditional attempt to provide a safety net for the unemployed, but without eroding work motivation, has mutated into a production line for children with damaged personalities. And the key point to note is that we can't blame anyone for having a particular personality profile, because our personalities are something that happens to us. We don't have a matter of choice there. So I say, let's not put up with a benefit system that causes extra children to be exposed to unconscientious parenting, which then leaves them at the higher risk of developing personality characteristics that damage their life chances. I think it's sad we haven't paid more attention to the evidence of the harm that our benefit system inflicts, just as I think it's sad that we have still not heeded the alarm bell about the danger of unconditional benefits that Beveridge sounded way back in '42. And your heart may tell you that voting for the motion means you're being mean-spirited. And I'm here to tell you that the scientific evidence suggests the opposite, and that those who vote against the motion are supporting a benefit system that perpetuates the misery it's supposed to relieve. So, if you think it's acceptable for our benefit system to be an elaborate form of state-sponsored brain damage, then go ahead and vote against the motion. If, like me, you think that's unwise, then I urge you to vote for the motion.
I hope you bought a pint for the mate of yours that came up with the phrase, because it's setting you in good stead. Our last speaker against the motion is the Chief Executive of the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. He is a former head of the No. 10 Policy Unit and was Chief Advisor on Political Strategy under Tony Blair before becoming Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research. Please welcome Matthew Taylor.
Thank you. Now, T.H. Huxley once said in this very room in response to someone he was debating with, he said, "I hate to destroy a beautiful hypothesis with an ugly fact." So let me try to destroy a beautiful, well, actually, no, let me try to destroy an ugly hypothesis with some facts. So very briefly, James offered you two arguments. He said that higher benefit levels led to higher levels of single parenthood. There is no correlation at all between benefit levels and levels of single parenthood. One of the other countries that has high levels of single parenthood is America. America and Britain are quite mean in their benefit systems. Many other countries are much more generous, so they have lower levels of single motherhood. So that fact is simply unsupported by any international evidence. He also said, bizarrely, that unemployment could be explained by benefit levels. Now, just ask yourself, do you think that unemployment rose after the credit crunch because of benefit levels? Do you think that unemployment rose in the early years of Margaret Thatcher's government because of benefit levels? This is a completely ludicrous hypothesis to suggest that unemployment is unrelated to what goes on in the economy or the labour market, but is simply a reflection of marginal changes in the benefit system. So that's James's argument. Adam's argument. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that one of the organisations that was very complimentary about Adam's book is the Adam Smith Institute, because it's a right of centre think tank, and these are a set of ideas attractive to people of the right of centre. But a few weeks after that review was posted on the Adam Smith Institute, there was a little note posted by the person who wrote the review, and he said this: "When writing this review, I was unaware of a number of surprisingly basic errors in some of the data analysis underpinning parts of the welfare trait. Suffice to say, had I been aware of these issues at the time of writing the review, I would probably have taken a somewhat different tone." The errors included in Adam's book are the fact that his claim that people who are unemployed have more children than people who are not unemployed. He only reaches that statistic by excluding, bizarrely, people who have no children. So as one reviewer said, this is like saying that Chelsea scored more goals than Arsenal last season and then admitting you hadn't actually included the games when Chelsea didn't score at all. So people, and like James and Adam, are fond of the idea, and this is the idea they have been encouraging you to believe, the idea of feral families who pass unemployment on from generation to generation, like a kind of state-sponsored hereditary disease. But maybe you'd like to ponder how many people in this country are actually in families that have never had work. And the answer to that question is 1.5%. And of that 1.5%, a very large proportion include a person with a significant disability. So this image of feral families that have never worked and pass it on from generation to generation is simply a myth. As James and Adam know perfectly well, the vast majority of poor people in Britain are not employment resistant, to use one of Adam's phrases, or genetically inferior as a consequence of benefits. They are instead caught in a cycle of insecure, low-paid work. Now, this leads to a very big question. Why is it that a book based on contested evidence that doesn't include any new primary research, is written by somebody, by his own admission, who has no academic background in social policy or in child development, has received so much publicity and praise from right-wing commentators? Why is this? Well, the reason is this. We want to believe aspects of Adam's argument. We want to believe that the reason people are poor is that they are inferior or degenerate. We want to believe that while the way to incentivize middle-class people is to give them more money, the way to incentivize poor people is to give them less money. We want to believe this because it's much less troubling to us than the actual facts about poverty in Britain and what those facts say about us and our society. So let me ask you a question. This some audience participation now. Let me ask you a question. How many of you accept the principle, don't answer yet, how many of you accept the principle that a good society is one in which all children, born free of sin, free of error, should have broadly similar chances of succeeding in life depending on their talent or efforts? Now, I'm not asking you how we achieve that outcome. I'm not asking you whether it's realistic. I'm just asking you, do you accept the principle that a good society is one in which all children born free of sin, free of error, should have equal opportunities of success depending on their talents or efforts? Who believes in that principle? Put your hand up. Okay, so nearly everybody, every single person in this room just about believes in that principle, but I don't need to tell you how far away from that principle we are, that children whose parents pay for private education are 6 times as likely to go to a good university as children from a poor background, that people born in the late 1970s in the highest social class are 30 times as likely to be in that class now than people born at the same time in the lowest class. 30 times as likely. Adam and James tell us the reasons for entrenched poverty are to do with benefits. But most people, the overwhelming majority of people, as Jess has told you, who are in poverty, are in families with at least one person in work. But the ladders to opportunity are steep. Only 1 in 5 workers on low pay in 2002 had managed to move out of low pay by 2012. So they're working, they're in low pay, but it's getting out of low pay that's the hard thing. And these figures, these facts, they don't reflect forces beyond our control. They reflect choices we made. Of the richest 30 countries in the world, the UK has the 6th highest level of inequality. Over the last 30 years, other countries have grown as quickly as us, or more quickly, and managed to keep inequality in check. We've chosen things. We've chosen to cut the value of benefits. We've chosen to reduce the power of trade unions. We've chosen tax cuts for the wealthy. We've chosen a housing policy, which is a wealth policy. All these things take us further away from the principle that you say that you support. Now, it's an uncomfortable feeling when you believe one thing but something else happens. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. So when someone comes along and tells us we don't need to worry about not living up to that principle because the reason people are poor is not because of our choices, but because they're genetically hardwired to be poor. Because benefits make poor people breed uncontrollably. Well, how reassuring it is. A major study of welfare reform across Europe looked at this question. It said, why is it some countries are mean and some countries are generous? And the single fact they found most important was this. In countries that are generous, people think that people on benefits are just like them, but they happen to be poor. Whereas in countries that are mean, they think that the poor are a different race of inferior people. And so we hear from James and Adam what we want to hear. The problem isn't us, it's the poor. The problem isn't well-off people hoarding opportunity and wealth. It's that we're being too generous to people who are on a basic job seeker's allowance of £73.10 a week, or £57.90 a week if you're under 25. I don't know if any of you are going to Hicks across the road for dinner after this event, but if you are, you will find that it will cost you the whole of 1 week's job seeker's allowance to pay for a set menu for 2 and the cheapest bottle of white wine. Now, that's not to say that there aren't major problems with our welfare state. Reductions in-work benefits mean more and more people in poverty are in work. As I said, housing policy, housing benefit curbs mean that more and more families are living, as Jess said, in temporary accommodation. They are in work, families in London today in work, being forced to leave work in order to get access to housing outside London. Benefit withdrawal rates mean that people on low pay have an effective marginal tax rate of 65%. They only keep about 30 pence, 35 pence when they get earnings. The RSA, the organisation that I run, has encouraged the idea of a universal basic income. Very modest, set at the same level of the job seekers' allowance. This could massively improve work incentives because people wouldn't lose that money when they got a job, and it can provide people with greater security and flexibility at a time when more work is part-time and short-term. But the reform of welfare needs to be based on the question of how we provide dignity and opportunity to the poor. It should be based on treating the poor in the way that we would want to be treated ourselves if misfortune was to befall us. So look, tonight is a knockabout debate. It's a bit of fun. But at its heart is a simple question. When it comes to inequality, poverty, and social exclusion in modern Britain, where do we point the finger? Do we take the easy, comforting route and point it at the poor, or the threadbare welfare system that keeps the wolf from their door? Or do we have the courage to point it at ourselves? The courage to take the steps in our own lives and in our own political choices that move us just a little bit closer to that simple ethical idea that you all support. Let me end with a quotation from the American management guru Robert Anthony. He said simply this: "When you blame others, you give up your power to change. Don't let people like James and Adam and the myths they peddle take away your power." Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you to all our speakers for keeping so admirably to time. We've reset behind, as you can see. Before we go into the discussion, the Q&A, let me reveal the vote that was taken as you came in, walking past Hicks to enter the Royal Institution this evening. Before you'd heard any of these arguments, you voted as follows. For the proposition, 29%. Against the proposition, 20%, and as is typical at this stage, or that stage of an evening, 51% of you, just over half, were undecided. So you'll have another opportunity to vote towards the end of the discussion. But let's get rolling. And shall we start with the first bit, we should start with the last bit that we heard, the universal income proposition. It's getting some traction. We hear about it quite a lot. It's being voted on in Switzerland, bits of Holland and other countries
Finland
doing. Giving it a shot. Do either of you chaps want to have a bash at that?
Yeah, well, it's one of these things that makes great sense in theory, but it doesn't make sense to me as a personality researcher, because it ignores the reality that some of us possess personality profiles that mean we're less motivated to work than the average individual. So the key thing is that when highly conscientious individuals are likely to go out to work, even in receipt of UBI, those of us at the lower
is the
universal basic income,
yep.
Those of us at the lower end of the conscientiousness scale need strict conditionality in order to be spurred into working for a living. So I'm worried that UBI would exacerbate the overrepresentation of less conscientious people in the ranks of the unemployed, and hence thereby risk perhaps having an increase in negligent parenting.
James, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's rather bizarre, this basic income, because it's one of the few things on which Charles Murray, a right-wing conservative libertarian, and Matthew Taylor agree. It's sort of like a sort of teaming together of, I don't know, Harriet Harman and Kim Kardashian. It's a bizarre combination. And my worry is that in fact, I think Tim Harford, I think one economist who looked at the thing, said there are three kinds of people who support a basic income, and the third kind was those who can't add up. The difficulty is, of course, that people may not work as much. We don't really know, but they may not work as much, and therefore they may not earn enough money to pay the basic income, in which case the whole system collapses. But can I just actually answer one of Matthew's many accusations? He said there was no evidence of the level of lone parenting being affected by benefits. Actually, there's a Spanish academic who made a big and long study of this issue, and who I visited in Barcelona, and she actually quantified the extent to which changes in benefits would change the level of lone parenting. And she did this without taking account, which is most important in the case of Britain and America, because America is the world leader in lone parenting, of the effect of social housing projects, as they're called in America. And so if you add that in, the effect becomes vastly greater. But even without that, there is an effect.
Very good. Now, I mean, this question of incentives is quite interesting, isn't it? And I think it is something which divides the two sides. And I suppose we could be arguing either about a correlation between benefits and say, lone parenting, or indeed worklessness, or a causation. And I just wonder whether either of you would like to speak to those 2 points, because it's kind of clearly for the proposers important that the one does cause the other. Where do you sit on this?
I think personally, I mean, what you've just said about your Spanish study, as Matthew said, why then do we not have really high rates of lone parenting in Sweden, in Norway, in countries where benefits are much higher? Also, as somebody...
That's on the correlation point.
Yeah, so I don't see the correlation. And the causation of lone parenting is not falling at the feckless women who are, you know, having babies to get council flats. As somebody who had a baby at 22, I genuinely, it made me feel like I mattered in the world, and there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with the fact that young women have babies because they feel like they don't matter, and it's no surprise then that in countries where women are much higher educated that the birth rate completely drops. It's no surprise that in countries where equality for women is much greater that the birth rate drops. And the idea for me, as somebody who worked in a refuge, that lone parenting is feckless, is irresponsible. Lone parenting for the people I worked with was the absolute best thing for their families.
I'm certainly not going to get into an argument with a mother about motivations for having children, especially one who's given birth to a £10 plus.
£10, 10 ounces,
thank you.
£6
those ounces,
placenta.
I'm sure can. But the proposition, thank you. But the proposition that benefits can incentivize idleness doesn't seem as obviously, perhaps to you, absurd as the lone parenting thing. Why isn't it possible that access to benefits might encourage one to work less?
I'm not saying that there aren't people who are not motivated to work, but we're talking here about social policy. We're not talking about anecdotes. And I think at the level of social policy, the suggesting that there is a correlation or even a causative effect between benefit levels and levels of unemployment lacks any strong empirical base. Actually, let's talk about a success story. Britain's made a lot of progress in recent years in reducing the level of teenage pregnancy. And that's nothing to do with benefit levels. That's to do with a very effective policy, which was really focused on getting young women, particularly young women who'd had children, to go and talk to other young women and girls and talk to them about the choices they were making. And it was particularly about giving those girls a sense of the possibility in their lives if they were to delay having a child. So there are ways of addressing these issues. It's not through punishing people or calling them inferior. It's through careful and effective social policy. On the universal basic income, it has been tested in American states. It's been tested in other parts of the world. The evidence is it improves work incentives. And the reason it improves work incentives is very simple. At the moment, if you get a job, you lose your benefits, which is why you have a withdrawal rate of about 65%. If you have a universal basic income, you don't lose your benefits when you get a job. The only group, however, there is a group that actually their work incentives decline slightly if there's a universal basic income, and that is the mothers of small children. So the mothers of small children do, under universal basic income, on average, choose to spend about 2 more months with their young children rather at work. Well, I think that's kind of okay, to be honest, as the effect of a social policy. So universal basic income needs to be implemented incredibly carefully. We've costed it. It costs about an extra 10 billion, which overall, it's not a huge amount for a reform of this scale. But the other thing about universal basic income is look at what's happening to the labour market. I mean, James didn't talk about the labour market at all, but there are huge changes in the labour market. Think, for example, this evening when you go home, most of you will probably now get an Uber driven by a gig worker, an Uber car driven by a gig worker rather than a full-time taxi driver. In an economy of more short-time work, more part-time work, and much more self-employment, the thing about basic income is it enables people to have that kind of flexibility that they need to move between jobs, also to retrain. So it's much more suited to the modern labour market. And the people who support it, by the way, James, also include Milton Friedman. John Stuart Mill was a supporter of it. I think Adam Smith was a supporter of it. So you were a bit slightly partial in the suggestion that it was just me and Charles Murray.
You want to get Uber to spend some of their war chest on lobbying for your income?
Adam, do
you want to come in? Yeah.
I don't think we can dismiss peer-reviewed studies as anecdotes. For example,
let me take that point more generally. So you were attacked on the science, and although we are at the Royal Institution, I don't want to spend the evening on a ding-dong, but I'm going to give you, if you choose, a brief opportunity to respond to the criticisms that were levelled at your research.
I'm just going to talk through a few studies that were quoted in the book.
Do it briefly, yeah.
These are not my studies, so you don't have to take my word for it. You can look them up. Daly et al. 2015 studied 16,000 UK citizens who've been measured on self-control in childhood, and self-control is a construct that approximates to measures of conscientiousness, agreeableness. And their results were telling. So the children with low levels of self-control went on to suffer the greatest increases in unemployment during economic downturns. So whilst unemployment is a lot... Well, hang on, let me finish.
You've quoted a bit of research. Let's explore. What does that piece of...
my point yet. Unemployment is not all about the
I
economy.
did say we weren't going to have a ding-dong.
Yeah, that's right.
No. Give him a second to refute.
Let's do it study by study.
I didn't interrupt you, so don't interrupt. I didn't interrupt you.
What I'm going to propose, Matthew, is that we give a chance to rebut, and then we'll carry on.
Let's just keep this polite.
I think that's
so whilst a lot of unemployment, whilst a lot of unemployment is about the economy, of course, as you rightly say, it's not the whole story. So there's many factors that can contribute to this, and one of them is personality. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's the whole story.
I'll let you go briefly, but yeah.
Fine.
Yes,
yeah, of course it's true that people who suffer from personality challenges or from a whole range of challenges are more likely to be unemployed. Yeah.
Too quick.
What exactly? That's like saying. And we've also done some research that shows that shorter people are less likely to be professional basketball players. Where does this end? What relevance has this got to your argument? Because your argument is you have two key arguments in your book. One argument is that if people are on benefits, they're more likely to have children. That isn't true. And the second argument is that if you raise benefits, it generates something, a kind of personality flaw, which means that you're less likely to take jobs. Just yesterday, the government published the research undertaken by DW, a major piece of research, and what it found was that when benefit levels fall, people's propensity to take a job actually declines, and when benefits rise, they're actually slightly more likely to take a job. So the two core hypotheses in your book don't have a foundation.
Okay. So I'm going to cap the discussion there, but having established that you disagree as to the evidence on this proposition.
Well spotted.
Can I ask you one thing on that, Adam? And just as a research scientist, would you say that the claims that you're advancing on the basis of the evidence in terms of personality are generally supported within the scientific community, or should we, who are not experts in this domain, consider yours to be a partial view? I'm asking from ignorance.
So personality influences employability. It's mainly conscientiousness and agreeableness. So conscientiousness affects the sort of contracted aspects of work performance, like how many widgets you make per hour.
Yep.
Whereas agreeableness affects what's called organizational citizenship. Yep. So sort of non-contracted helping behaviors, which combine together to produce somebody...
Neither of us disagree with that. It's perfectly fine.
And James, can I just ask you, what's your take on this business of personality research, scientific peer-reviewed research, in supporting the arguments that you're making? Do you think that the scientific evidence supports the position you're taking on this debate, and is that an important part of your argument?
It's certainly not important. I mean, this is Adam's field, not mine, so don't ask me about it. He knows far more about it than I do. But can I just answer one other thing? It's been I don't want to give the impression, which Matthew has seized on and attributed to me, that I think benefits are the only thing that affect levels of unemployment or indeed levels of lone parenting, and other matters too, such as care for the elderly, which is another area we haven't gone into. But conditionality is also terribly important. These are the two key things that affect levels of unemployment. And they make a huge difference. And we know that it makes a huge difference, and that you can do better or worse at administering welfare and benefits, because we've seen big changes that have taken place in various countries. The Hartz reforms in Germany resulted in a halving of the level of unemployment in that country. 5% of people who were unemployed ceased to be unemployed as a result of the Hartz reforms, which were reforming the conditions of benefit more than the amount of them. So I certainly accept that conditions make a big difference, and indeed taxation and incentives make a difference. Both of them make a difference. It's very hard to disentangle. It's like chicken and eggs sort of territory.
Very good. Well, that sounds biological to me. So we're going to come to the floor. A few ground rules, chaps. If you wouldn't mind, chaps and chapesses, to stand up, please, if you wouldn't mind, and introduce yourselves. Microphones will come to you. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. We will endeavour to address all of the questions. It's possible that 1 or 2 may slip through the net. And my friends, please do be brief. So we'll go here first. Stand up and introduce yourself, and we'll go to the lady at the front there second. Ma'am.
Good evening, my name is Rebecca. My question is more to do with the benefit system exists and it will continue to exist, but going forward, I'd like to know sort of what the possibilities are for change. I know from my studies in politics that the richest 1% in UK own as much wealth as 60% of the population. That is a huge inequality which was touched on by some of the speakers, and I'd like to know how that could be changed and how that would change the benefit system in turn.
So how can it be changed, or what's the change to the benefit system that would bring about the change?
How would changing the inequality in the UK affect
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Very good. Ma'am.
Hello, my name's Vera. I don't know if I'm audible.
You're on, yep.
I've done some pretty horrendous jobs in market research call centres. And I would like to say on the subject of antisocial personality disorder, think of the man who is the founder of Sports Direct. Think of workers who are this is in America, who have to wear nappies because they, so that they defecate and urinate while at the assembly line. And do you really want to carry on maligning people who might, as Jess Phillips say, want to swing the lead and not be masochistic?
Very good. Thank you. And I believe there's a gentleman at the back there, sir.
Yeah, hi. A question to the people sat on my right, obviously not politically. I wondered if you could play devil's advocate slightly with your own arguments and ask you the question is, if you take it to the logical conclusion, then benefits would become infinite and become unaffordable. So do you accept there are any correlations between the value of benefit and the effect on behaviour? And therefore, in your experience in policy, can you give some examples where changing levels of benefits have had a positive effect and were potentially even implemented by left-wing governments, so not evil?
I think someone's right. Chaps, do you want to go with that one first, Jess?
Yeah, I'll make 2 quick points and hand over to you. Is that right? Or do you
No,
go first?
you go first.
Are you sure?
I haven't thought of anything yet.
Okay, right. Just nudge me when you have. Yeah. So I thought you made a fantastic point. One argument I made is for universal basic income as a reform. I think that there are things that we have done which have increased inequality, which could have been spent on improving the quality of the benefit system and the support we give people. And one of the reasons we've got low benefits is because we prioritise tax cuts like inheritance tax cuts. So I do think we make choices, and I think if we wanted to have a better benefit system that supported people, part of the way we could do that would be to address some elements of inequality, particularly around wealth, I think. But in relation to this point, no, it's a very well-made point. I agree with that. I think that had the proposition today been that certain elements of the benefit system don't work, I would completely agree with it. The Labour government that I advised did start to act in relation to incapacity benefit, because it is absolutely true that people on incapacity benefit actually become iller if they are on it than if they are supported back into work. So I completely buy the idea that when you help people out of work, you help them with a combination of support and also, yes, some incentives. And there needs to be some conditionality in the system. And as Jess will tell you, because she knocks on the doors of working class estates, in those estates, the people who have the hardest view about making sure that people are obeying the rules are the people in those places. So I agree with that. But let me make this point. The level of sanctioning now in our benefit system, how many people is it a year? I mean, it's about 700,000, I think. Ridiculous. So it's about 700,000 people a year now get, those benefit levels I talked about, that's 75 quid a week. They get some of that taken away from them because they have failed to attend an interview on time, they've failed to attend the job centre on time, they've failed to attend a job interview on time. I think that some of the time that is spent in job seekers' centres policing people and taking benefits away from them, if it was spent on supporting people in low pay to be able to advance in their careers. So I agree you need the right balance of carrot and stick. At the moment, we've got a system that is 95% stick and very, very little, well, 5% carrot. And we need to get that balance into much better shape.
Jess, do you want to add anything? I'm going to go along.
I mean, I would totally agree with that. I think, like I say, I've met people who swing the lead, and I've met people who have potentially become welfare dependent by some of the benefits that they get. And I would say incapacity benefit is probably the area where that has happened. However, what I would say is that these things will never, ever work in isolation, and there have got to be other things put in place. So I was a woman under the teenage pregnancy scheme. It came into my school in the 90s, and I didn't have a baby till I was 22. So there are things that work. There are things that you do that go and support people and incentivize people. And without those incentives, taking away a person's benefits will just it will make their incapacity considerably worse. But there is no doubt about it. There are certain benefits. But there are benefits that we are all taking that I think potentially could be squeezed, and the amount of money or tax that we pay should change. And the inheritance tax is a really good example of how we need to. So in my constituency, 22,000 children were going to be affected by the changes to which they scrapped in the end for now, the tax credit changes. And there are 3 people in my constituency who have a house that is big enough to benefit from the changes that they made to inheritance tax. So this government took 3 families in my constituency who, let's not forget, have to be dead. They're not racing towards that benefit. They took them instead of 22,000 children in one area. So that's one of the things I would like to see change. I'm fairly supportive of a UBI. But yeah, I'm not here to say that I don't want to see benefits with withdrawing. I want to see them withdrawing at the same rate support increases.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a great point about this balance of incentives, because the whole point of personality research is it shows that one size doesn't fit all. So a highly conscientious person, if you give them a task like counting the grains of rice in a sack, a 10-kilo sack, they'll do it conscientiously just because they're conscientious. Right. Whereas an average person will also do it conscientiously, but they'll need a large financial incentive to do so, like I would. Right. So it depends on your personality as a sort of lens through which you view the world, and hence some people just need an arm around their shoulder. You know, they've got an average personality, they've just had a hard time, just need a bit of encouragement to get back to work, and that's fine. Others are much more resistant.
Do you want to take the nappy point? I mean, the antisocial behaviour amongst the...
Well, amongst management,
yeah.
That sounds to me like a matter for trade industry legislation. I wouldn't know about these kind of workers' rights things, but in terms of individual people responding to incentives, personality makes a huge difference.
Adam, can I ask you a question about this personality thing? Because I just don't understand it. So you're saying that our personality determines how hard-working we are. Now, all the people in this room, I'm sure, have worked in organisations. And they've probably worked in organisations with bad bosses, or they've had bad bosses, when people haven't been motivated, they haven't worked very hard, and then they've got a new boss, or perhaps they've become the boss and they're brilliant, and then people do work hard. So the personality of these people hasn't changed, but the social context has changed. So why are you telling us that personality is so determined?
It's what's known as a trait-situation interaction. So if we just go back to the counting the grains of rice in a huge sack, the more conscientious you are, the lower the incentive you need to do it. And the less conscientious you are, the greater. So if you have a great boss, he'll bring out conscientiousness from an average person.
So should I worry that my children have a predetermined destiny?
No, it depends.
So they're basically, I mean, they were born into Benefits Fat Street, so what am I to expect from them?
It's an interaction between their personality and then the environment that they're in. As if you have a really great, highly motivating boss, he will bring out the best, or she will bring out the best, out of their people.
The boss on the
I think they might have a chance.
Yeah,
You know,
I hope
right?
so. One of them's a right pain in the ass.
Okay. James, do you want to come in on this?
Well, I think it's rather bizarre because the other 2 speakers have now both confessed that they are aware of some of the ill effects of the benefit system as it is now.
Conceded it's not perfect.
Matthew said that he was aware under Labour that some people on incapacity benefit were getting more incapacitated as a result of being on that benefit. In fact, Labour was very aware of things going wrong and talked often about it, and they referred to the 1 million people. And it's in a way, we're not arguing on this side there should be no benefits. I mean, what we're arguing is that it's become dysfunctional, that far more people have become lone parents than could or should have become lone parents. We're arguing far more
Having
people are
more money in your
unemployed
pocket doesn't
and on
make your husband
incapacity
stay.
benefit than could and should be on it. That is the point. Not that there should be no one on these
But
things,
James,
but far fewer.
But
should
James,
be on these
but
things.
let's look, because
We'll go to the floor in a second.
let's look at the history of incapacity benefit.
You should have a right to reply on everybody.
But let's look at the issue of incapacity benefit.
Are you
it's
chairing
an-
this
it's
debate,
an
or
interesting
is this
question.
gentleman here?
Incapacity benefit was at a relatively low level. Incapacity benefit was at a relatively low level, and then we had the early 80s recession, and the main group of people affected by the early 80s recession were middle-aged men who lost jobs in manufacturing. A lot of those men went to the doctor, and the doctor signed them off because the chances of them getting employment with the skill base was extremely limited, and they often had back injuries or whatever, and the doctor said, right, you're never going to, there's no more jobs in the mines, no more jobs in the car factories. And so incapacity benefit rose dramatically. I mean, it rose, the Prime
Matthew, you're
Minister...
a very hard man to interrupt.
The
So
person that rose fastest on them was Margaret Thatcher.
But I will.
Right.
Okay.
And then...
No. Okay, stop there. James, in fairness, I will give you a very brief reply to the reply, and then I will go to the balcony.
Which part of his
Oh, I
reply?
don't
No,
know.
you
Whichever
go
you
to the balcony.
Up there, yes. I'm afraid with the lighting I can't see what's going on, but there's somebody I know in the balcony who wants to say something, so please do that, and then we'll go there. Yep.
I was actually going to stand down because it was asked by the woman over here, but it was only answered by one person. So isn't the fundamental question, I think you all agree in one way or another that the benefit system is not perfect, as with most public policies, seems like a fairly obvious statement probably to everyone in the room, but what would you change? Because it is a hugely complex system, it's living and breathing
So we've
every
got...
day.
Yep.
And secondly, I think Matthew might actually agree with the motion because it sounds like he thinks the benefit system isn't far-reaching enough. So I wonder what he thinks about that.
Thank you. Looks like there's somebody over there, yes? Oh, yes, hello.
Right, hi, my name is Louise. I just want to ask a question about the perception of single parents, and particularly single mothers, on benefits. So it seems like, from what you were saying, I think it was James, that there's a perception that children from these families don't do very well, and that, like single parents, they don't do very well. But how about more research has been done into those who actually do well? Because I think there are a lot more out there than we're hearing about. And I just wonder whether the existing research tends to sort of perpetuate this myth that they're not all doing very well. So that's me.
So whoever gets the microphone first after this lady and that gentleman can go next, and then I'll come to you in the next round. Is there a mic anywhere in this vicinity? Let's go to the lady in the middle, if we can.
Hi, thank you. No one on the panel has mentioned universal credit, which is billed as the sort of future of the welfare system. It's meant to mimic many of the habits you have to do in work through signing on the job centre and through conditionality and sanctions, and it's not an unconditional handout. One of your central arguments is that the benefit system perpetuates misery by incentivising worklessness, is that argument irrelevant under the future of welfare in UC?
Okay. Well, James, do you want to go for that one first? How's the universal credit thing working out?
Yes, well, it's a bit early to say. Obviously, the bravery of Ian Duncan Smith's new system is that it attempts to bring in housing as well, because this is the housing and housing benefit has been caused one of the greatest work disincentives, and that's one of the reasons. I mean, for example, Sweden doesn't have this sort of means-tested housing to the same degree. If you can't afford the housing, you ask to move to a smaller house, council housing, and so it's to try and it's been the elephant in the room, the housing, social housing, and the housing benefit, which has caused enormous increase in work disincentives and in lone parenting. And Ian Duncan Smith was trying to take it on. It's very, very complex and difficult, but it's worth taking on. And everybody else has funked it. I mean, actually, he talks. The Labour Party funked welfare reform, let's face it. When they were elected with a big majority, they had the opportunity, they funked it. Meanwhile, in America, Clinton took it on. In Germany, Chancellor Schroeder, a socialist, he took it on. These people had the bravery to take on a dysfunctional system. And I'm afraid Tony Blair and Gordon Brown didn't. And it's been left to Ian Duncan Smith to try.
Adam, you could take any of the points, but I do wonder about this question about people who are doing well rather than people who are doing badly. Your focus on research, personality looks at the bottom end. What can we learn from the top?
So, again, the niche that you're in makes a big difference. So, if you're in a particular job where it requires detail focus, then conscientiousness, the higher you score on conscientiousness, the better.
So the message is no different if you look at the top end than
no. There's certain jobs where having a more big picture view is better than having a detailed focus view, but these are niche things.
Okay, good. We're being pressed to find more things that we want to change in the benefit system, Jessica.
Well, there are a number of things that I would change in the benefit system. So one of the benefits I talked about was maternity pay. I would like to see that equalised for men. I would like to see an exact replica of the statutory benefits that women receive to take time off work to look after their children to be replicated for men. So much of the worklessness at the moment that has been being discussed and, making their children brain dead has, I'm afraid, fallen to women who have been so workless and fat and pregnant that they couldn't go out to work. That actually, I think that change in the benefit system would make a huge difference for equality in this country, income equality between the genders for a start off, but also it would make a massive change in how children perceive society as they grow up. It would make a massive, I think lots and lots of young men nowadays want to take time off with their families, and at the moment the halfway house that the current government has put in place basically eliminates that benefit going to women, so I would see a change in that. With regard to universal credit, in my constituency universal credit has been rolled out, and so far...
How's that working up?
Cracking. So far it is only single men with no children who are currently accessing universal credit in my constituency, because when they came to roll it out, the system was so complicated, a simplification of the system was so complicated that it didn't, surprisingly enough, for a government that when they rolled out the bedroom tax forgot soldiers and people who only have their kids at the weekend and carers. It didn't take account properly of the complex lives of people with children. And so at the moment, it is only being rolled out. I have a massive concern about universal credit, as much as it might make things simpler in the future. When you're talking about victims of domestic violence, what universal credit presents is death, because now all benefits will be paid to one person in a family. And that presents no freedom for a woman who is being coerced.
Okay, I want to take another round of questions, but do you want to come in briefly on where we are? And we're going to go to the lady there.
There's a really important principle to understand about welfare reform. It's the single thing you need to understand about welfare reform more than anything else, and that is that welfare reform is a classic example of what policymakers call a trilemma. And what they mean by a trilemma is there are three goals, and you can choose two of them, but you can never have all three of them. And every welfare reformer, Frank Field, Harriet Harman, right through to Ian Duncan Smith, will tell you that they can defy this trilemma, but they can't. It is an absolute golden rule. Now, the three things you go for in welfare reform are helping the poorest, that's number one, incentivizing work and saving, that's number two, and cutting costs, that's number three. Now, you can choose any two of those, but you can never choose all three. What Ian Duncan Smith wanted to do was to help the poorest and to improve incentives, and to do that, he had to raise costs. Unfortunately, as we all know, he lost that argument in the Cabinet, and the Treasury now says that universal credit will cost less than the system that it's replacing. As a consequence, it won't improve incentives, it just shuffles them around from one group to another, and it doesn't improve life for the poorest.
Thank you. Now look, folks, it's a vote. We're going to have another round of questions, but we'd like you to start thinking now about how you are going to vote in the final motion. The ballot boxes are coming round, and just to remind those of you with low attention spans or the personality, what you have a piece of paper, a card here, right? You can tear it in half if you want. If you're for the motion, put the for thing in the ballot box. If you're against, put the against thing in the ballot box. If you can't decide, and by now you've been given ample opportunity, put both bits in. Is that clear? Do that now as we listen to the next round of questions. So do it quietly. The votes will be counted and we'll hear the results at the end. So have you got one yet, microphone? No. Yeah. So there's a lady there who we'd like to go for next. Shh. Chaps, let's refocus in. So we'll go to the lady in the middle here, and then there's a gentleman at the back who's got his hand up, who's had his hand up for a while. I can't see any mics. Yeah. Can we get a mic to the lady in the blue shirt? We'll go to the gentleman first. Yeah, sir.
Yes, hello. My name's Patrick. It's a question slash, statement for Matthew.
Briefly, yes.
When he was in the government with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, did he recognise that the in-work benefits was going to have such a dramatic effect on the immigration from the rest of Europe, which in turn then perpetuates the misery of those sort of UK people who are not working because the Europeans all come to take the work that's there. Oh. People do come from overseas to work, as they are working, but they're also taking in work benefits too.
Very good. Pleased it's taken this long to get to Europe, but I'm also pleased that we have got there. There's a lady here who's had her hand up patiently. Can we get a microphone down to the third row, please? Thank you, chaps. Very good teamwork here. It's coming your way, ma'am.
It's not as easy.
Excellent. There you go.
Hi, I think during this talk, a lot of topics have been touched on, which I've experienced personally. I'm Bengali, and my father came here in the 70s, and he worked as a furnace operator, and then he worked in a Ford car factory. And I'm actually trying to retrace my family history because my dad died when I was 5. Leaving my mum to raise 6 children by herself, and she couldn't speak English. And that's just kind of the beginning of my story. But I think that what just hasn't been spoken about, and I think when we're spoken about as though what we're sort of genetically or hereditarily or whatever inferior, I think it's so offensive because it takes away the complete context within which we've grown up in. And it completely dehumanizes us, actually. So I think I wanted to refer to the point that the lady made up there, which was that there is no research. There is hardly any research, and I've been trying to look for it. I studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies. I had to drop out because my opinions and my perspectives were undermining other people's perspective and opinions. And now I'm taking care of my mum full-time. I'm a full-time carer. This morning I was at the benefits office because I can't afford to pay my rent anymore. And it's the first time that I've applied for, housing benefit. I don't know what the process is. I don't know how much I'm going to get. I still don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to pay my rent. I'm already behind, and the context within which I've grown up in is completely ignored. And I'm just seen as a freeloader, or even sometimes kind of crazy and a bit of a degenerate.
I want to thank you. Yeah.
It's why is the research not happening? Why are we not encouraged? When I was at school, I was never encouraged to study at the School of Oriental and African Studies. I didn't know it existed.
Thank you.
I never knew anyone who studied at Oxford or Cambridge.
I'm saying thank you because it's a really powerful interjection. We will respond to it. I'm going to stop you because I think we need to take other voices. But thank you for sharing your experience. We have a voice in the balcony.
Lovely. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening. One factor that I was surprised the panel hasn't mentioned is the role of drugs, for example. In particular, drug addiction has in unemployment and in misery and in terrible conditions. Would you support moves, particularly now in the United States, to turn drug policy from a criminal issue into a public health issue? And with the support of drug courts, for example, to help people wean themselves off addiction and then back into the labour market.
Very good. So we've got Drugs Europe and the dehumanising of people. Who wants to take what and when?
So the point about in-work benefits, so 2 things. One is Labour reduced the number of children in poverty by 500,000, and most academics believe that Labour's record in reducing child poverty is the most impressive of any country in a developed world context. But the growth of in-work benefits in combination with the deregulation of the labour market did mean we got to a situation where basically the state was subsidising low pay, and George Osborne is absolutely right to be introducing the national living wage and shifting the burden of low pay to employers and away from the taxpayer. The benefit system has to adapt, just like the rest of society adapts. So in-work benefits work very well, but they got to a point where they were not working effectively, and that's now starting to be addressed. So I agree with that, but don't forget the contribution that they made.
And do you want to take the Europe point, anyone, of that bit of the discussion? There was people coming in from Europe. And
the overwhelming amount of evidence shows that people who come from Europe come here because of our wage levels, not because of our in-work benefits.
Okay.
And which is why, actually, the living wage, which is a good thing, will encourage more migrants.
Do vote to remain, though.
Well, we'll come to that. I think we've covered that already, haven't you? James Adam, there's a point here about the language that's being used about people, which is being made, and I wonder if you can address that.
I think the key thing to realise, there's a big difference between IQ and personality. So IQ is mostly inherited. It's about 80% heritable. So when you pop out of your mother, your IQ is pretty much determined.
That's all right with the £10 and
when you think about personality, it's mostly shaped by our experiences. So that's why there's a lot more headroom for policy to cause damage, because if it causes extra children to be born into disadvantaged households, the headroom for affecting their personality is significant.
But I'm just wondering if you can address some of the discomfort which seems to be being caused, the opposition and perhaps in the room, from some of the language that you're using. I'm not criticizing the arguments you're making, but I'm asking you to address the discomfort which the language you use causes. What's your take on that, James? I'd be interested as well.
Personality is our kind of our being, so it's an uncomfortable area to research. I even find it uncomfortable doing studies because we're kind of getting down to the very core of our identity. The way I teach it to my students is that your IQ is like the horsepower in the engine of a car, whereas your personality is the steering system that kind of determines what you use your IQ for.
James, are you troubled in any way by any of the implications of the language that's being used in this debate? Do you think we should respond to discomfort that's felt by labelling or blaming people?
Well, I mean, I think, in a way, not everybody here may know that Adam was no platformed at the London School of Economics because his views were considered so...
The talk was postponed until June the 29th.
Okay, very good.
Nice plug. Nice plug.
So they can be prepared for difficulties. But it's sometimes the truth is not pleasant. I don't. His views are, and his research is new to me. It's not part of the way I come at it at all. But it's, sometimes the truth is unpleasant, and indeed sometimes people find what I say. If I say benefits should be reformed, I mean we've had a certain amount of anger from the other side, and sometimes it's because they think that I'm attacking the poor, and it's an easy way to say, I didn't say anybody was feral. I didn't make any accusation, but I've been accused of that because it's sort of, gosh, aren't I lovely? I don't want to say anything bad against anybody poor, and it's an easy way. And I'm saying something that's more difficult for people to appreciate, that actually the system is causing misery on a large scale. In fact, the psychological damage done by the amount of separation of people that has taken place was described by Oliver James, a psychologist, as a psychological version of Third World War. That is what is happening to many people in this country.
James, you'll be delighted to hear that you're going to have the last word, because I'm going to ask our speakers in reverse order to give us a moment of reflection and summary of their position. Sadly, this will be too late to influence your votes, but I think it'll be a nice taste to leave in our mouths. Do you want to go first, Matthew?
Yeah, look, the question is that whether the benefit system perpetuates misery. And people have said, well, perhaps Jess and I agree with that. The benefit system isn't perfect. The benefit system needs to change. It needs to change as the world changes, and the world is changing ever more quickly, and therefore the benefit system, because it's difficult, because it's managed by Westminster, it takes a long time for laws to change, can get further out of keeping. We need to think imaginatively about how we make the benefit system work. But when you see the phrase the benefit system perpetuates misery, what you're being invited to do is to think that fundamentally the reason that we have poverty and social exclusion in this country is the benefit system. And that what we're inviting you to do is to reject the idea that it is the benefit system that is responsible for the misery of poor people. The reason that people are poor is to do with a variety of factors: the nature of the economy, the nature of the labour market, the skills they've got, the fact that we have made choices in our policy which benefit people at the top and don't benefit people at the bottom. So it's too late because you voted. You voted already. But in as much as this invites you to blame the benefit system for the pattern of inequality and poverty in this country, then if you voted against the proposition, you were right.
Thank you, Adam.
My take-home message is a simple one, in that going forward with the benefit system, we should factor in personality. The fact that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to the kind of incentives we require to go out to work, for example. And that should be, I'm not just saying that because I'm a personality researcher and I want lots of juicy grants. I genuinely believe this. So politicians should think more about personality traits when they're trying to design incentive structures for the benefit system.
It's not just personalised cancer treatment, personalised benefits.
Yeah.
Jess?
The idea that the benefit system perpetuates misery is not something that I'm a stranger to. Every day when I knock doors, as has been highlighted in areas where people are struggling, are in work and are struggling, they will point out their neighbours to me about how they're wrong-uns, and she never goes out to work and he doesn't go out to work and the kids are in the garden. And there is always a perception that there is somebody next door getting something that you are not getting. So I ask the people, my response is always, would you swap places? It's so easy for them. You're going out to work. Their life's really easy. Would you swap places? And the answer is, oh, of course not. So what makes you think those people chose it either? What makes you think your life is so different to theirs that they chose something completely different to you? There are many reasons why people end up with benefits, and the lady in the audience has highlighted one of them. We should stop treating these people like they are not like us, because one day all of us will fall and need the benefit system if we haven't already.
Thank you, Jess. James.
I just wondered, since you already voted, there's no point in trying to persuade you. What I would like to just say is that there are ways to improve our system. I wrote, in researching my second book, I travelled to 11 different countries, trying to look at what's happening in other countries and see how we can make a better welfare state, not just the benefits, but also other areas. And I think there's some things we can learn from other countries in all these areas. I think the experiences I saw in Germany and Switzerland and Singapore show, and indeed in America, in Wisconsin, show us how we can reduce the number of unemployed. And the behavior of Italy in relation to lone mothers, I think, is instructive and interesting in terms of they have a much lower rate of lone parenting than we do, and I think we could learn from them. And indeed, in all the areas of the welfare state, there are things we can learn from Sweden and all these other countries. It's worth looking around. Thank you.
So Europe has something to offer, at least in terms of welfare reform research. So, folks, you'll remember that before the debate, you voted 29% for the proposition, 20% against, and 51% of you were undecided. I'm pleased to say that all but 3% of you have now decided. So that's a good thing in itself. And the final result of your vote is that for the motion are 36% against 61%, which is a 17% swing against the motion. My friends, I'm delighted that you've agreed to stay with us slightly late. It's been a lovely evening. My name is Daniel Glazer, and please join me in thanking Matthew Taylor, Adam Perkins, Jess Phillips, and James Bartholomew.